Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about nonfiction signposts. This is another type of reading strategy just like the fiction signposts that we've done before. So the 5 that we're going to talk about include extreme or absolute language, contrast contradictions, numbers and stats, quoted words, and word gaps. So first, extreme or absolute language is when the author uses language that leaves doubt or exaggerates. It suggests that there is no exception to what is being said. When you see this, we stop and ask ourselves, why did the author say it like that? Words that signal extreme or absolute language might include like every or perfectly, meanest, totally, never. When we ask, why did the author say it like that, our answers might lead us to identifying the author's point of view, their purpose, realizing if the author is trying to make us think a certain way, aka like if the author might be biased. So here's an example. No one on this planet will be untouched by climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change announced. The report warned that climate impacts are already severe, pervasive, and irreversible. So in this, what would be the extreme or absolute language? Probably no one, right? And then I would say severe, pervasive, and irreversible, like especially irreversible because that's suggesting like it's 100%, that's just going to be the way it is.
The next one, contrast and contradictions, is familiar to you because it is in the fiction signpost as well. When the author is showing you a difference, something that is different from what you already know, or a difference between two things that are in the text, that is when you need to stop and ask yourself, what is the difference and why does it matter? Some words that could signal that you're seeing this, if it's a by contrast or however, otherwise, on the other hand, that could lead you to believe that there might be a contrast and contradiction. If you stop and ask yourself that, what is the difference and why is it important, you could figure out several things that are listed here that will help you with your reading comprehension with nonfiction. So, in this passage, Sparta was content to keep to itself and provided army assistance when necessary. Athens, on the other hand, wanted to control more and more of the land around them. You could see, on the other hand, there is a contrast there and there's something different, and you should take a look at that.
Next is numbers and stats. So when you notice any specific numbers, number, words, or amount, we especially see in nonfiction writing percentages. So when we see this, we need to stop and ask ourselves, why did the author use these numbers or these amounts? When we stop and ask ourselves this, it's going to help us make a conclusion or a comparison, find facts, see details, and recognize specific evidence. So in this example, in fact, nearly half of all bottled water is reprocessed tap water sold at prices up to 3,000 times higher than consumers pay for tap water. So here the numbers and stats, you could, like the first part, nearly half of all bottled water, that would be considered numbers and stats. And especially, okay, I actually see numbers here, sold at prices up to 3,000 times higher. Those are some numbers and stats where we would stop and ask our question.
Quoted words is another nonfiction signpost, and this is very common, and you will see it in probably almost all of the informational reading that we will do. When the author is providing you a quote, a voice of authority, a personal perspective, or cited someone else's words, you've got to stop and say, why did the author choose to quote that particular person? That answer could lead you to understand the author's point of view or identifying the author's purpose in the writing. You may be able to identify some bias, or the author came to some sort of conclusion. It can lead you to have a perspective, the facts and opinions, and generalization. Right here, you can see there is a quoted word from the Director of Citizenship and Immigration Services. So as you were reading this within an article, a nonfiction article, you'd need to think, why is this so important? Why was this included? If you do that, you're going to be deeply understanding what it is you are reading.
Lastly, we've got word gaps. Word gaps is when the author uses a word or phrase that you don't know. So when we see this, we stop and ask ourselves several different things. We might ask ourselves, do I know this word from somewhere? How do I recognize this? This is part of the reason why we learn root words, because more than likely, if there's a word that you don't know, I bet you there's a root word in there, in which case knowing that root is going to help you. We might stop and ask ourselves, does this seem like technical talk for experts on the topic? Like, is the author assuming that I know this word even though I'm not an expert? And 3, can I find clues in the sentence to help me understand the word? If yes, you would continue reading. If no, that is when you would stop and you would actually look up the word to make sure that you are understanding it. With word gaps, when we ask our question, our answer might lead us to decide if we need to look up a word or keep reading to determine the word's meaning. So a classical above ground eruption is just one of the ways a volcano can disturb the ocean and generate a tsunami. Waves can be triggered by submarine events, eruptions, cascades of ash, or the collapse of volcanic flank. Okay, I don't know what volcanic flank is, and that was the end of the quote, so then I would have to look it up.
Another thing we're going to be focusing on this week is big 3 questions, and this is linked to the nonfiction signposts. The big 3 questions are 3 questions that we're going to focus on. The first one is, what surprised me in the article? Second one, what did the author think I already knew, but I didn't? And the last one is, what challenged, changed, or confirmed my belief?
So with what surprised me, whenever something is shocking or surprising, a wow moment, highlight and or annotate, highlight with a color, or annotate with an exclamation mark. Note that this may also be another signpost such as numbers and stats. You might be like, whoa, that's a big number, or wow, that's a lot smaller than I thought.
Oftentimes, you're going to see, what did the author think I already knew, but I didn't? Whenever the author assumes that we as the readers know something, but we don't, we're going to highlight that, and then we're going to put a question mark by it. This is often linked with word gaps. They'll throw in these words we don't know, and we're going to have to define them in order to truly understand what it is we're reading.
Would challenge, change, or confirm my belief? Whenever something is challenging what you already know, changes what you already know, or confirms what you already know, highlight or annotate a C. So this would be something that you already have an idea on something, but the author is challenging what you believe already, or they're purposely trying to change what you already know, or perhaps they're confirming what you already know. This is often linked with contrast contradictions, especially if you are coming in with background knowledge on something, but the author is suggesting something else. So when we are annotating our articles and highlighting, we want to be using these exclamation marks, question marks, and C's so that we can see all of the big 3 questions and how we are reacting to a text.